Washington, D.C. in 1971 was a city on edge. It was a place of deep divides. Political power and poverty lived side by side. For the city's black community, there was a feeling of being overlooked, of being unheard. And in the spring of that year, a new fear began to creep through the neighborhoods east of the Anacostia River. A fear that would grow with the summer heat and last for more than a year. It was the fear of a shadow, someone who was taking their daughters. The newspapers and the police would eventually give this shadow a name: the Freeway Phantom. The name stuck because the victims, all young black girls, were often found dumped near major roads. The name suggested a single monstrous figure, a serial killer who stalked the city, chose his victims, and then discarded them. That's the story most people know. But is it the truth? Was it really one man? Or was the reality something more complicated, more local, and in some ways even more terrifying? The answer to that question is buried in the details of the case, in the whispers of the community, and in one haunting phone call that changed everything. The nightmare began on a Thursday in April. Carol Spinks was 13 years old. She lived in the southeast part of the city. Her older sister had sent her to the store. It was just a short walk, a trip she'd made 1,000 times. She was supposed to buy groceries at a Safeway just a few blocks away. She never came home. Her family panicked. They called the police. They searched the streets. For 6 days, there was nothing but silence and dread. Then, a road crew working on an embankment next to the Suitland Parkway found her. Her body was on a grassy slope, hidden from the passing cars. She was still wearing the coat she had on when she disappeared. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The city was shocked. A child was gone. But at the time, no one could have known this was just the beginning. 3 months later, in July, the fear returned, this time with double the force. Darlenia Johnson was 16 years old. She was on her way to a summer job at a rec center on a hot morning. It was just after 11 a.m. She was seen walking near her home, and then she was gone. Her family reported her missing immediately. The police started looking, but 10 days passed. On the same day Darlenia's family was holding out hope, another girl vanished. Her name was Brenda Crockett. She was only 10 years old. Brenda was small for her age. She had been sent to the store by her mother to buy a loaf of bread. It was around dinner time. The store was close. She should have been back in minutes. When she wasn't, her mother went to the store. The clerk said Brenda had been there, bought the bread, and left. She had simply disappeared on the short walk home. A few hours after she went missing, the phone rang in Brenda's home. It was Brenda. Her voice was faint, almost a whisper. She said a white man had grabbed her and pulled her into a car. Oh, she was crying. She said she was in Virginia. Her sister, who took the call, could hear a man's voice in the background, coaching her, telling her what to say. The phone call was a confusing, terrifying piece of the puzzle. It was the first real clue in any of the cases, but it was a clue that would only deepen the mystery. A few hours after that call, Brenda Crockett was found. She had been taken to an area just off the Baltimore-Washington Parkway. Like Carol Spinks, she had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The very next morning, a construction worker found Darlenia Johnson. She was just a few feet from where Brenda Crockett's body had been discovered. She had been missing for 11 days. Her cause of death was the same: strangulation. Now the city was in a full-blown panic. 2 girls found in the same spot on the same day. A third murdered just months before. The pattern was undeniable. Someone was targeting young black girls in Washington, D.C. The police knew they had a serial killer on their hands. They formed a massive task force, pulling in dozens of detectives. They called him the Freeway Phantom. The media ran with it. The name was on every front page, in every news report. Parents were terrified. They kept their children inside. Curfews were set. The streets of many neighborhoods grew quiet after dark. The killer, it seemed, was enjoying the attention. He wanted to talk. A month after Darlenia and Brenda were found, he did something incredibly bold. He found Brenda Woodard's missing notebook. Brenda was another victim. We'll get to her. He took a page from her school book and wrote a note. He then placed that note in the pocket of a coat that was for sale in a local department store. A shopper found it and called the police. The note was chilling. It was written in a messy, almost childish scrawl. It read, "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me if you can. Freeway Phantom." The note was a direct taunt to the police. It was the killer giving himself the name they had created for him, and it seemed to confirm their theory. The use of the word others meant he was taking credit for all the murders. It had to be one person, a single evil man who was hunting the children of DC. This note solidified the Freeway Phantom legend, and it created a clear narrative: one man, one monster. It was a simple, terrifying story. but the truth was already getting muddy, especially because of that phone call from little Brenda Crockett. Let's go back to that call. Brenda told her sister she was with a white man in a nice car. The police had a description, but something about it felt wrong to the investigators and to Brenda's family. The man's voice could be heard in the background. It didn't sound like he was threatening her. It sounded like he was telling her what to say. It sounded like a script. Why would a kidnapper let his victim call home? And why would he have her describe him to her family? It didn't make sense. This led to a dark and disturbing theory, a theory that completely changes how you see this case. Many investigators then and now believe Brenda Crockett knew her killer. They believe her killer was likely black, not white. And they believe he forced her to make that phone call to throw the police off his trail. Think about it. In the racially charged atmosphere of 1970s DC, a report of a white man kidnapping a black girl would send the police in a very specific direction. It would send them looking outside the community. It would send them on a wild goose chase. The man in the background coaching her wasn't her kidnapper trying to be clever. He was her killer, using her last moments to create his alibi, to create a phantom that didn't exist. If this theory is true, it means at least one of the murders, Brenda Crockett's, might not have been committed by the same person who killed the others. It opens up the possibility that there wasn't a single Freeway Phantom at all. The fear in the city continued to grow, and so did the body count. In October 1971, 12-year-old Nenemosha Yates disappeared. She was walking home from a grocery store in the early evening. Her story was almost identical to the others. A simple errand, a short walk, then nothing. Her body was found a week later, dumped off a different highway, Pennsylvania Avenue, just over the Maryland line. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The pattern held. A month later, in November, it happened again. This time, the victim was 18-year-old Brenda Woodard. She was a bit older than the others, which made some investigators pause, but she was also described as having the mental capacity of a younger girl. She was friendly, trusting. She was on her way home from night school. She got off a bus and started the walk to her house. She never made it. The next morning, she was found in a grassy, wooded area, once again near a major road, assaulted, strangled. It was her school notebook that the killer later used to write his taunting note to the police. The note that seemed to tie all the murders together. After Brenda Woodard's murder, there was a pause. The winter passed. The city held its breath. People wondered if the killer had stopped, or moved on, or been arrested for something else. But in May of 1972, the fear came back one last time. Diane Williams was 17 years old. She was a high school student. She was last seen at her boyfriend's house. She left to go home, a short walk away. Her strangled body was found later that same day, dumped alongside Interstate 295, and she was the sixth and final victim officially attributed to the Freeway Phantom. 6 girls, all black, all from similar neighborhoods in DC, all abducted and strangled, all found near a major roadway. On the surface, it looks like a textbook serial killer case. The note from the killer even says so. It seems open and shut. One man did. But the deeper you look, the more the single killer theory starts to fall apart. The police had a suspect profile. They believed the killer was a black man, likely in his late 20s or early 30s. They thought he lived or worked in the area where the girls were taken. He probably drove a car, but not a flashy one. He was likely someone who could blend in, someone the girls wouldn't immediately fear. This profile was based on good police work, but it directly contradicted the one solid piece of eyewitness testimony they had, Brenda Crockett's phone call. She said her abductor was a white man. So, which was it? Was Brenda telling the truth, or was she being fed a lie by a black man standing next to her? The entire case hinges on that question. Let's explore the idea that it wasn't one man. Let's look at another theory, one that was very strong at the time but has been somewhat lost in the Phantom legend. This theory points not to a lone wolf, but to a pack. There was a group of young men in the area known to police. They were a loose-knit gang, some called them the Stompers. They were known for petty crime, assault, and for being territorial. And they drove a very specific car, a green Chevrolet Vega. This group became a focus of the investigation for a few reasons. First, they were local. They knew the neighborhoods. They knew the shortcuts. They knew the quiet, deserted spots where a body could be dumped. Second, they fit the general profile of the killer or killers. And third, and most importantly, several of the victims reportedly knew some of these men. They weren't strangers. This is a critical point. A lone serial killer often hunts strangers. But if the victims knew their attackers, it changes the dynamic completely. It makes the abduction easier. A girl is more likely to get into a car with someone she recognizes. Brenda Crockett, the 10-year-old who made the phone call, reportedly had a run-in with some of these men shortly before she was killed. She had gotten into a fight with one of them. She wasn't afraid of them, she stood up to them. Some investigators believe her murder might have been a revenge killing, a way for the group to assert their power. And if a group of them killed her, it would make the phone call scenario even more plausible. One or two could hold her while another coached her on what to say. They could have worked together to create the white man story to deflect any suspicion from themselves. This theory, that a local group was responsible, also explains some of the inconsistencies in the case. For example, the wide age range of the victims, from 10 to 18. A single killer usually has a very specific type, but a group of young men, acting on impulse or opportunity, might not be so selective. The method of killing was always strangulation, which could point to a single killer's signature. But strangulation is also a common method of murder that doesn't require a special weapon. It's possible that this was just the method the group used. What about the note? The note signed Freeway Phantom that claimed responsibility for the others. This is the strongest piece of evidence for the single killer theory, but even this can be questioned. What if the note wasn't written by the killer of all 6 girls? What if the person who killed Brenda Woodard, the girl whose notebook it was, wrote the note to take credit for the other murders? It could have been a member of the group wanting to claim the notoriety of the Phantom for himself. Or it's possible one person from the group was the main instigator, the leader, and he wrote the note on behalf of all of them. The note doesn't necessarily prove a single person acted alone in all 6 murders. So now we have 2 competing stories. Story 1 is the simple, chilling tale of the Freeway Phantom. A single, shadowy serial killer who terrorized DC for a year, taunted the police, and then vanished. Story 2 is a messier, more complicated, and more local story. It's a story of a group of young men from the same community as the victims. A story of neighborhood violence, of revenge, and of a cover-up so clever it fooled the police and the public for decades. Over the years, the investigation focused on several individuals. One man, Robert Askins, was a person of interest. He reportedly knew some of the victims and was part of that local scene. He was questioned, but police could never build a strong enough case against him or anyone else. The problem was a lack of physical evidence. In the 1970s, forensic science was nothing like it is today. DNA testing didn't exist. The police relied on fingerprints, fibers, and eyewitnesses. In the Phantom case, they had almost none of that. The crime scenes were outdoors, contaminated by the elements. There were no credible witnesses who saw the abductions. All they had were the bodies, the pattern, and that one confusing phone call. The case eventually went cold, the task force was disbanded, the files were put away in boxes, but the pain never went away for the families of Carol Spinks, Darlinia Johnson, Brenda Crockett, Nenemoshia Yates, Brenda Woodard, and Diane Williams. They were left without answers. Their daughters became footnotes in a ghost story about a phantom, their individual lives and stories overshadowed by the legend. In the 2000s, there was a renewed push to solve the case. Detectives pulled the old files. They re-examined the evidence with modern technology. They hoped to find DNA on the victim's clothing or under their fingernails. But the evidence was old, degraded, the samples were too small, or too contaminated to yield a clear DNA profile. It was another dead end. So, we come back to the original question. Did a serial killer murder the Freeway Phantom's victim? The answer is not a simple yes or no. It's a probably not in the way we think. The evidence for a single serial killer is compelling at first glance. The tight timeline, the similar victimology, the consistent method of murder, and of course the taunting note. These are all hallmarks of a serial offender. It's the story that is easiest to understand, the one that fits our cultural image of a boogeyman. And it's possible. It's possible there's one man who was smart, careful, and incredibly lucky. A man who started killing, and then, for reasons we'll never know, just stopped. But the evidence against the single killer theory is, in many ways, stronger. It's just more complicated. Brenda Crockett's phone call is the biggest problem for the Phantom theory. If you believe the call was coerced, and most investigators do, then you have to believe her killer was someone she knew, and someone trying to frame a fictional white man. This one detail unravels the entire narrative. If her killer was a local, then why not the others? The local gang theory, the Stompers theory, answers a lot of questions the single killer theory can't. It explains how the girls could have been abducted so easily, often in broad daylight on streets they knew well. They weren't taken by a scary stranger, they were likely lured into a car by a familiar face. It explains the phone call. It explains the killer's intimate knowledge of the area, not just the main freeways, but the small, forgotten dumping grounds. And it fits with what often happens in reality. Violence is rarely random, it's usually personal. The victims and their killers often come from the same world. It's very possible that the Freeway Phantom was not one person but several. It might have been a core group of 2 or 3 individuals who were responsible for most of the murders. And then maybe one of them, the one who wrote the note, got a taste for the fame and tried to claim them all. It's also possible that 1 or 2 of the murders were completely separate, committed by a different person who was inspired by the initial killings, a copycat. The label serial killer implies a certain kind of predator, a methodical, organized, often psychologically driven individual who repeats a ritual. The Freeway Phantom case doesn't quite fit that mold perfectly. It feels more chaotic, more opportunistic. The murders of Darlenia Johnson and Brenda Crockett, for example, were so close in time and location that it suggests an explosion of violence, not the careful planning of a lone hunter. The truth is likely a hybrid of these theories. There was a pattern of terror in D.C. in 1971 and 1972. Young black girls were being hunted, but the hunter might not have been a single phantom. It might have been a group of neighborhood predators who knew they were invisible to the wider world. They knew the police didn't patrol their streets the same way they patrolled the wealthy white neighborhoods across town. They knew they could get away with it. And for more than 50 years, they have. The name Freeway Phantom is catchy. It creates a myth, but it also does a disservice to the victims in the investigation. It pushes us toward a simple conclusion that the evidence doesn't fully support. It makes us look for a monster in the shadows when the real monsters might have been standing in plain sight, people the girls knew, people from their own neighborhood. The case remains one of Washington, D.C.'s most painful and enduring mysteries. The files are still open, but the trail is ice cold. The suspects are old now, or dead. The memories of witnesses have faded. What's left is the story, and the story we tell matters. If we say a serial killer did this, we accept the myth of the Phantom, we accept the idea of a random, unstoppable evil. But if we question that, if we consider the possibility that this was the work of a group of local men, the story changes. It becomes a story about a community that was not only preyed upon by a killer, but also betrayed from within. It becomes a story about how a group of young men could kill 6 of their own, and how a city and its police force failed to protect them and failed to find justice. So, was it a serial killer? By the strict definition, yes. A series of linked murders were committed, but the person or people behind those murders might not have been the singular, phantom-like figure the name suggests. The reality was likely something more grounded, more personal, and in that way much more tragic. It wasn't a monster from a horror movie, it was a product of a specific time and a specific place. The killer wasn't just a phantom, he was a neighbor. Or maybe he was a group of them. And that is the coldest truth of all. The real mystery is not who the Freeway Phantom was, but how he or they managed to get away with it, leaving a legacy of fear and 6 unanswered questions in the form of 6 stolen lives.